When the photo was taken, I smiled, because I thought it was over. It wasn't. That day, 2 of the 6 men in that photograph were killed. From the testimony of Rene Gagnon, who survived Iwo Jima, that famous photograph was taken on February 23, 1945. But behind it was a story almost nobody knew. February 19, 1945. Iwo Jima, Pacific Ocean. The island was small enough to disappear from a map entirely, but its strategic value was immense. It was a critical staging point for bombing runs against Japan, and the Japanese had been preparing it for months. 21 square kilometers. Tunnel networks, concrete bunkers, artillery positions with firing angles covering every approach, and at the island's highest point, Mount Suribachi, 160 meters of volcanic rock, rising like a watchtower over everything below. Marine Corporal Ira Hayes came ashore on the morning of February 19th. He came from Arizona. He was Pima Native American, a quiet man. He didn't say much, but he had volunteered. He had come to fight. Alongside him were thousands of men from the 5th Marine Division. On the landing beach, bullets were hitting everything. Men were going down. The water was turning red. Hayes had to keep moving. Stopping wasn't an option. In front of him, Mount Suribachi rose up, black, volcanic, lethal, and at its summit, a Japanese flag was flying.
The Battle of Iwo Jima lasted from February 19th to March 26, 1945. American forces landed with more than 30,000 Marines. The Japanese were defending with approximately 22,000 soldiers. The Japanese tunnel system stretched for over 18 kilometers, and the bunkers were embedded in concrete. This slowed the American advance dramatically and drove casualties to extraordinary levels. Taking Mount Suribachi was tactically critical. The summit gave observation over the entire island, and as long as it remained in Japanese hands, every movement below was exposed.
The first 4 days were hell. Getting close to Suribachi seemed almost impossible. Every movement drew fire from the summit. Japanese riflemen were buried inside the tunnels, invisible, but everywhere. Every rock was a potential threat, every hollow a possible trap. Hayes was moving forward with his unit. The men around him were going down. One morning he woke up, and 2 of the 5 men in his tent were gone. They had been taken in a night raid. Don't ask, they told each other. Don't ask the names. Because once you knew the name, the loss was heavier. But Hayes knew the names, all of them. On the morning of February 23rd, the order came. Climb Suribachi, get to the top, and raise the flag. A small group was selected. Hayes was among them. They started climbing together. Fire could come from any tunnel entrance. Every step could be the last, but they kept going. When they reached the summit, Hayes looked down. He could see the beach. He could see the ships. And down below, on that dark red sand, thousands of men were still fighting. The flag went up, and Joe Rosenthal's camera caught the moment.
The order to climb Mount Suribachi was given on the morning of February 23, 1945. The first flag was raised by a 40-man patrol, but it was small and difficult to see from below. A second flag raising was organized using a larger flag. It was this second raising that Joe Rosenthal photographed. The image was transmitted to Washington that same day and published across the world the following morning, featuring 6 men raising the flag together. It became one of the most widely reproduced war photographs in history.
The photograph spread across the world. Newspapers in Washington ran it on the front page. Radio stations announced it. People embraced each other in the streets. The war had been going for 4 years, and America was exhausted. This photograph had given something. Hope, maybe, or at least an image, something to hold on to. But the 6 men in that photograph were still on Iwo Jima. The war wasn't over. The summit had been taken, but the island hadn't. And the Japanese were still fighting from every tunnel, every bunker, launching raids every night. Hayes described those days this way. I didn't even know the photo had been taken. We raised the flag, we looked down. The war was still going. We climbed back down and kept fighting. That sentence carries a great deal. Washington made a decision. The men in the photograph would be identified, pulled from the island, and brought home. They would be used for a war bond campaign. They would travel to cities across America, give speeches, raise money. But first they had to be found. Because there was a problem. Some of the men in the photograph had been misidentified. Families had been notified. Newspapers had published names, but the real names were different. And 3 of the 6 men in the photograph were no longer alive. Franklin Sousley, Harlon Block, and Michael Strank. They had been alive when the photograph was taken. They were gone within days, on the same island, in the same war.
The process of identifying the men in the Iwo Jima flag photograph was complicated and contentious. Wrong names were initially announced to the public. Harlon Block's mother insisted her son was in the photograph, but her account was dismissed for a long time. The correct identities were only established after extensive investigation. A new analysis conducted in 2016 went further, suggesting that one of the names had still been wrong all along.
March 1945. The island was still burning. The Japanese weren't surrendering. Resistance continued from every tunnel, every rock hollow, every concealed position. American casualties were climbing every day. Hayes was pushing inland from the beach with his unit. Every meter of ground cost something. One morning he noticed that Sergeant Block wasn't there. Harlon Block, from Texas, a farmer's son. He had been standing right next to Hayes in the photograph. The news reached Hayes that morning. Block had gone in the night. Artillery. Hayes stopped. Just for a moment he stopped. Then he kept going, because what else could he do? A few days later, Franklin Sousley was gone. He came from Kentucky. He was the youngest among them, 19 years old, a sniper's bullet. And Michael Strank was gone. He had been born in Czechoslovakia, had come to America as an immigrant, had chosen to serve, the most experienced among them, artillery. 3 of the 6 men in the photograph were gone, all of them on the same island, all of them within the same few weeks. On those nights, Hayes wrote nothing in his diary. The pages stayed blank. Some things don't fit into words.
The question of who exactly appears in that photograph has never been fully resolved. The Battle of Iwo Jima lasted 36 days. During that time, approximately 7,000 American Marines were killed, and more than 19,000 were wounded. Japanese casualties exceeded 20,000, and only 216 Japanese soldiers were taken prisoner. These numbers place Iwo Jima among the bloodiest engagements of the entire Pacific War. Marine Corps Commandant General Holland Smith said after the battle, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue," a phrase that has been associated with Iwo Jima ever since.
March 26, 1945. The island fell. The last Japanese resistance had been broken. Iwo Jima was officially in American hands. Hayes sat on the beach. He looked out at the water. He counted who was left. Of the men who had come ashore with him on that first morning, how many were still alive? Very few. When the news came that they were going home, Hayes felt something strange. It wasn't joy. Was it guilt? Not exactly, but something close to it. Why me? Why not Block? Not Sousley? Not Strank? There was no answer to that question. When they arrived in Washington, the 3 survivors were welcomed. Hayes, Gagnon, and Bradley, the faces of the photograph, the nation's heroes, ceremonies, speeches, crowds in every city. Everyone wanted to see them. Everyone wanted to shake their hands. Through all of it, Hayes felt the same thing. This isn't right. He said in one interview, "They call me a hero, but the real heroes stayed on Iwo Jima. I'm just a survivor." Those are 2 very different things. That distinction followed Hayes for the rest of his life. He started drinking, a little at first, then more. The alcohol made the weight slightly more bearable. At least that's how it felt, but it didn't.
Ira Hayes experienced serious psychological problems after the war. Alcohol dependency shaped the rest of his life. He was arrested multiple times. He returned to his home in Arizona but never found his footing. What is now described as survivor's guilt sits at the center of Hayes' story. He died in 1955 at the age of 32. The cause of death was hypothermia and alcohol. He has been the subject of dozens of songs, films, and books across North America. Johnny Cash wrote a song about him.
The photograph kept appearing everywhere. It was used for the war bond campaign and raised millions of dollars. Then it appeared on war memorials, then in textbooks, then everywhere. Joe Rosenthal received the Pulitzer Prize. The photograph became an icon. But the men in the photograph didn't become icons. At least 3 of them never could, because they were gone. Rene Gagnon went home. He lived an ordinary life, but he never stepped out of the photograph's shadow. He worked in a factory, was recognized wherever he went, but that recognition gave him nothing. He died in 1979. John Bradley went home. He never spoke about it. He didn't even tell his children. Only after his death did his son research the truth and write a book. Hayes went home and drank. 3 survivors, 3 different paths, but all 3 carried the same weight. The weight of the photograph, the weight of the ones who didn't come back. A photograph can save a nation's morale, but it can't save the men inside it. That truth was never clearer than at Iwo Jima.
The Iwo Jima flag photograph continues to be one of the most studied images in the history of war photography. Beyond the question of identity, its ethical dimension is also debated. The survivors themselves have said they felt instrumentalized when they were sent on the war bond tour. This tension between wartime propaganda and individual human experience has made the photograph a reference point in academic discussions of how war is represented and what that representation costs the people inside it.
Ira Hayes died in 1955. He was 32 years old. He was found in a field in Arizona on a cold night. Hypothermia and alcohol. He was alone. A man who had come from a small town, fought on one of the bloodiest islands in the Pacific, appeared in one of the most famous photographs in history. And in the end, he went out alone, in the cold. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, next to the other men from the photograph. Johnny Cash wrote a song about him, The Ballad of Ira Hayes. The song told a simple story. A man came home from the war, but he didn't really come home. That distinction matters. The body comes back. But sometimes something inside stays on the island. In the tunnels, in the rock hollows, in that black volcanic sand. And for the rest of a life, that absence is carried. The photograph is still everywhere. In textbooks, museums, memorials. 6 men, 1 flag, 1 moment. Frozen, unchanging, perfect. But outside the photograph there were lives. Lives that continued, suffered, ended. The photograph didn't show that. It couldn't. Franklin Sousley was 19 years old when he died. Harlon Block's mother spent years trying to prove her son was in that photograph. Michael Strank loved America. He had come as an immigrant. He had chosen to serve. All of them gone. Rene Gagnon, John Bradley, Ira Hayes came back. But they didn't really come back. Mount Suribachi is still there on Iwo Jima. The island is called Iwo To now, Japanese territory. The tunnels are still there. The concrete is still there. Every year, people from both countries come. They stand together, in silence. Because that summit is not just a hill. It carries the story of 6 men inside it. The ones you can see in the photograph, and the ones you can't.
The legacy of the Iwo Jima flag photograph continues to be examined today from both cultural and historical perspectives. The 2016 investigation that suggested one of the men had been misidentified all along sparked significant debate and drew international attention. The Battle of Iwo Jima holds an important place in both American and Japanese official history. The joint commemorations held every year have become a symbol of the peace between the 2 countries, and the photograph itself remains one of the most powerful and most debated images the war produced.